Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and the motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we focus on one essential component of the epistemic firewall. In this part 16, we confront a silent killer of clarity: rule type checking, category errors at the low level. This is the firewall mechanism that prevents fake paradoxes and deep mysteries that arise from mixing incompatible categories. The skill you will gain is that of a type inspector, the ability to detect when a rule is adding apples to oranges, treating patterns as substances, or confusing bookkeeping with causality. Our core question is, how do we prevent fake paradoxes created by mixing incompatible categories? This question addresses a profound failure in scientific reasoning: the category error. Many celebrated mysteries of physics are not deep truths about reality, but simple type errors, mistakes in categorization that vanish when we properly separate what is a pattern, what is a tally, what is a constraint, and what is a substance. The firewall's type-checking function is the immune system against this conceptual confusion. It ensures that every term in a rule belongs to a well-defined type, that operations between terms respect type compatibility, and that the rule's overall statement does not commit a categorical fallacy. The core revelation is stark. Most deep mysteries are just type errors. Treating a scalar like a vector, a pattern like a force, a coordinate artifact like a physical object, or a bookkeeping tally like a substance, these are category errors. They generate paradoxes, conservation law violations, and apparent mysteries that evaporate under proper type discipline. Let's build this from first principles. In our holophase ontology, everything is a pattern of phi and its derivatives. But not all patterns are the same type. We must distinguish between scalar patterns, quantities that have magnitude only. In phi language, these are invariants, patterns that remain unchanged under certain transformations. Example, the amplitude of a wave, a temperature field. 2. Vector patterns, patterns that have magnitude and direction in the space of derivatives. These track how phi changes in different directions. Example, the gradient of phi, which points in the direction of steepest change. 3. Tensor patterns, multidirectional rates of change. These describe how vector patterns themselves change. Example, the curvature of phi space. 4. Operational patterns. These are not patterns in phi itself, but patterns in our measurement procedures, our windows W and uncertainties delta. They belong to the meta level of observation. 5. Bookkeeping patterns. Derived tallies like energy, momentum, and information. These are computational summaries of omega k from v relations, not independent substances. Type checking is the discipline of keeping these categories distinct and ensuring that operations between them are valid. You cannot add a scalar pattern to a vector pattern. You cannot equate an operational pattern, a measurement outcome, with a fundamental phi pattern without specifying the measurement bridge. You cannot treat a bookkeeping tally, energy, as if it were a causal agent. Now, let's formalize this with an audio equation. Consider a proposed rule that states the force F equals the gradient of potential V plus the time derivative of momentum P. In symbolic form, we might write F equals minus hal V plus dP by dt. The type checker must analyze each term. F is a force pattern. In phi terms, force is a constraint on the second derivative of phi with respect to both time and space, a mixed derivative pattern. Its type is a vector constraint. Start of V is the gradient of a scalar potential V. The gradient operation takes a scalar pattern and produces a vector pattern, so del V has vector type. dp dt is the time derivative of momentum p. Momentum p itself is a vector bookkeeping tally related to phi's spatial rate of change. Taking its time derivative yields another vector pattern, so we have vector equals vector plus vector. This passes the basic type check. All terms are vectors. The operation of addition between vectors is valid. The equation is type consistent at this level. But deeper type checking must ask, what are the categorical natures of these vectors? Are they all the same kind of vector? Force is a constraint vector. Gradient of potential is a spatial derivative vector. Rate of change of momentum is a temporal derivative of a bookkeeping vector. They're all vectors, but they come from different categorical origins. The rule is asserting an equivalence between a constraint, a spatial pattern, and a temporal change of a tally. This is a valid type of rule. It's exactly what Newton's second law does, but it requires careful interpretation to avoid category errors in application. For example, one might erroneously think of potential V as a real fluid rather than a scalar bookkeeping field. Now consider a rule that would fail type checking. The temperature T equals the electric field E. In symbols, T equals E. T is a scalar pattern, temperature. It is a vector pattern, electric field, a derivative of the electromagnetic potential, which itself is a derivative pattern of phi. We have scalar equals vector. This is a type error. You cannot equate a scalar to a vector. The rule is categorically nonsense. Yet, in more subtle forms, such type errors pervade bad science. Consciousness equals quantum coherence. Information equals energy. These are categorical mismatches unless extremely careful bridges are defined. Why is type checking necessary? The failure mode it prevents is the proliferation of fake paradoxes and unresolvable mysteries. When types are mixed, we get apparent contradictions that waste generations of intellectual effort. The classic example is the twin paradox in special relativity. In its naive form, it seems paradoxical. How can each twin see the other's time as dilated? This arises from mixing types. Treating coordinate time, an operational label, as proper time, a physical invariant interval. When properly type-checked, when we distinguish between the coordinate time pattern, which is frame-dependent, and the proper time pattern, which is invariant, the paradox dissolves. The confusion was a category error. In holophase terms, type confusion often shows up as triunity confusion, treating omega, a temporal rhythm or rate, as if it were a spatial object, k. Treating k, a spatial structure, as if it were a moving agent, v. Treating vit, a coupling or flow between omega and k, as if it were a substance that can be stored. For example, the mistaken idea of flowing time treats the omega dimension as if it were a river, a spatial moving thing. This is a type error. Time is not a thing that flows, it is a dimension of change. The feeling of passage is a pattern in phi, not a movement of time itself. Another example. Thinking of curved space as if it were a rubber sheet that objects roll on. This treats the K pattern, curvature, a geometric property, as if it were a force agent, V, that pushes things. In truth, curvature is a constraint on motion, not a cause. Objects follow geodesics, paths of extremal phi change, in curved geometry. The curvature is a pattern, not a force. The firewall's type checker must catch these triunity category errors. A well-typed rule must respect the categorical distinctions between omega patterns, K patterns, and V patterns, even as it relates them. Now, let's connect this to energy as tally. This is where type errors are most common and damaging. Mysterious energy terms often appear when types are wrong. You're counting the wrong thing in the ledger. Energy is a bookkeeping tally, a scalar number derived from the omega kV relations of a rule. It is not a substance. It is not a causal agent. It is not a fluid. When people say energy is converted from one form to another, they are using a shorthand for a change in the dominant omega kV pattern. But if this shorthand is taken literally, if energy is reified as a substance that flows and transforms, we commit a category error. We mistake the tally for the reality being tallied. Consider the dark energy problem in cosmology. The cosmological constant appears in Einstein's equations as a term of a certain type, a scalar curvature term. But when interpreted as vacuum energy, we attempt to equate it to a quantum field theory calculation of zero-point energy, a sum over vibrational modes. This is a potential type error, equating a geometric curvature pattern, K-type, with the sum of harmonic oscillator energies, bookkeeping tallies of quantum field patterns. There are different categories. The mismatch in their calculated values, off by 120 orders of magnitude, may be the universe's type checker screaming that we've added apples to oranges. The firewall would flag this as a category error demanding resolution. Either we've mistyped one of the terms, or we've incorrectly bridged the categories. The operational interpretation of type checking is the practice of dimensional analysis and categorical auditing in theoretical physics. Every student learns to check dimensions. You cannot add meters to seconds. But type checking goes deeper. You cannot add a coordinate artifact to an invariant, a pattern to a measurement, a constraint to a substance. The firewall role is that of the inspection gate. You are the type inspector. Every rule must pass three checks. Dimensional consistency. Do the units match on both sides? This is the basic check that prevents adding seconds to meters. Category consistency. Are the terms of compatible categorical types? Is a scalar being treated as a vector? Is a pattern being reified as an object? Is a bookkeeping tally being used as a causal explanation? 3. Operational interpretability. Can each term be linked to a possible measurement procedure without category confusion? Does the rule mix what is measured with how it is measured? The firewall applies these checks to every term in the rule's syntactic form, S, and every clause in its triunity statement, T. Let's state clearly what assumptions are allowed and forbidden. Allowed. You may propose rules that relate different categories through well-defined bridges. For example, you can relate a temperature pattern, scalar, to the average kinetic energy of molecules, a bookkeeping tally derived from their motion patterns. But you must explicitly provide the categorical bridge, the derivation that shows how the tally emerges from the patterns. Forbidden. You may not propose rules that add or equate terms of incompatible categorical types without a justified bridge. Treat bookkeeping tallies, energy information, as primitive substances or causal agents. Confuse coordinate-dependent quantities with invariant patterns. Use a single term to serve two incompatible categorical roles in the same rule. What happens when the check fails? The license consequence is immediate and severe. Fail, immediate rejection. Rule rewritten or abandoned. There is no maybe it's new physics excuse for a category error. A type error is a logical error, not an empirical mystery. The rule is bounced back with a diagnosis. Category error in term X, treating a vector pattern as a scalar. The proponent must either fix the error or abandon the rule. Now we must state the explicit prediction and falsification for the type checking system. Prediction. Pretty rigorous type checking is applied to a domain of physics. Entire classes of apparent contradictions and paradoxes will vanish. Previously missing conservation statements will become clean and derivable, because the tally, energy, momentum, charge, will now be correctly defined from properly typed patterns. The prediction is conceptual clarity and the resolution of pseudo-paradoxes. Falsification condition for a rule's type correctness. If a rule requires mixing incompatible types to work, for example, if it must add a coordinate artifact to an invariant quantity to match data, or if it must treat a bookkeeping tally as a substance to explain causality, then the rule fails type checking. The falsification is the demonstration of the category error. If you can show that the rule's terms belong to different incompatible categories and no justified bridge exists, the rule is rejected. A historical example is the late 19th century concept of the luminiferous ether. It attempted to explain light propagation by positing a substance, ether, that filled space and waved. This was a category error, treating a propagation pattern, V, of the electromagnetic field, a pattern of phi, as if it required a mechanical substance, a K-type object, to wave. The Michelson-Morley experiment didn't just falsify a particular ether model, it revealed the category error. Light is a pattern. It doesn't need a substance to be its medium. Type checking would have flagged this earlier. You are assigning a substance category to a propagation pattern. This is a category error. Now, let's explore an Afghanistan-inspired analogy that illustrates the danger of type errors in a high-stakes practical domain. The diagnosis of illness in traditional and modern medicine. Imagine a patient from a rural village presents with fever, pain, and weakness. Two different rules for diagnosis are proposed. Traditional typology, potential type error. The healer says, the patient has been touched by a jinn, spirit. The fever is the heat of the jinn's presence. The treatment must drive out the spirit. Here, the symptoms, fever, pain, are categorized as direct manifestations of a supernatural agent. The rule mixes categories. It takes physiological patterns, body temperature, inflammation, and categorizes them as spiritual agency. This is a category error. Patterns are not agents. The treatment based on this rule, exorcism, addresses the wrong category. 2. Modern medical typology, type consistent. The doctor says, the patient has an infection. The fever is the body's immune response to bacterial invasion. The pain is inflammation at the site of infection. Here, symptoms are correctly typed as physiological patterns. The cause is typed as a biological agent, bacteria. The treatment, antibiotics, targets the cause within the same biological category. The rule respects categorical boundaries. Agent, physiological response, measurable symptoms. The village council, acting as a firewall, must type check these diagnostic rules. They would ask, dimensional consistency. Can the jinn hypothesis make quantitative predictions about fever temperature over time? No, it's not in that category. Category consistency. Does it confuse a pattern, fever, with an agent, spirit? Yes. Category error. Operational interpretability. Can we test for the presence of a gene with an independent measurement? Not without committing further category errors. The Council would reject the first rule as a type error. It might be culturally resonant poetry, but it is not a valid diagnostic rule for physical health. Adopting it leads to failed treatments and persistent mystery. The second rule passes type checking and can enter the testing pipeline. Lab tests, monitored recovery. This example shows how type errors cost lives in medicine and how type checking saves them. In science, type errors cost truth and clarity. In Holophase terms, the diagnosis is our rule about phi patterns. We must ensure we are not mistaking a phi pattern for a substance, a tally for a cause, or a coordinate choice for a physical reality. Now, we must state the mandatory episode 11 axioms, now enforced by type discipline. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. Type checking is a precondition for meaningful survival. A rule with category errors cannot be coherently falsified. What would falsify a category mistake? It cannot be varied consistently. How do you vary a confused concept? It cannot be independently replicated. Different researchers will interpret the confused categories differently. Type discipline enforces the axioms at the level of conceptual coherence. And, when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. A type error warrants immediate license revocation. The skill you gain from this part is categorical vigilance. You learn to spot type errors in scientific and popular claims. When someone says information is physical, you ask, what is the categorical bridge between the bookkeeping concept of information and the phi patterns you call physical? Are you committing a reification error? When someone says the universe is a computer, you ask, are you confusing the pattern, computation-like behavior, with the substance, a literal computer? What is the type of computer in phi terms? This skill protects you from being seduced by profound-sounding nonsense. This has immediate application in cutting-edge debates. In quantum foundations, is the wave function a physical field, a phi pattern, or a bookkeeping tally for probabilities, an information pattern? Type confusion here leads to endless interpretation wars. In consciousness studies, is consciousness a pattern of neural activity, a phi pattern in the brain, or a separate substance, dualism? The latter is a category error unless a bridge is defined. In cosmology, is dark matter a new phi pattern, a particle field, or a modification of the gravitational pattern, a change in the omega kV relations? Type checking forces clarity. Finally, let's summarize the epistemic function of this part. We have defined rule type checking as the firewall mechanism that prevents category errors. It ensures dimensional consistency, category consistency, and operational interpretability. Type confusion often manifests as tri-unity confusion. Energy and other tallies are bookkeeping patterns, not substances. The firewall acts as an inspection gate, with the user as the type inspector examining every term. The explicit prediction is that type checking resolves pseudo-paradoxes and clarifies conservation laws. The explicit falsification condition for type correctness is the demonstration of a category error, mixing incompatible types without a bridge. The license consequence is immediate rejection of the rule. It must be rewritten or abandoned. This strengthens the firewall by adding a layer of conceptual hygiene. It ensures that the rules entering the testing pipeline are not just well-formed and proof-carrying, but also categorically coherent. It prevents the waste of resources on chasing mysteries that are mere misunderstandings of categories. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Carry the lens of the type inspector. Let it be your shield against conceptual confusion. Before you are puzzled by a paradox, check the types. Before you are impressed by a deep mystery, audit the categories. This discipline is the mark of a clear thinker. Now we bridge to the next peril. Even a well-formed, proof-carrying, type-checked rule can be misused in a subtle way, by selectively applying it only when it fits and ignoring it when it doesn't. Now rules are well-formed and typed. Next danger, rule shopping. Salam, and peace be upon you.